Welcome back to the Investigator discussion series. I'm rather Incoherent, and this is Silas Marsh. Before we start talking about Silas, a couple of things. The first is that I probably underrate Silas, and this is as a result of having played alongside Silas a lot, but never having played as Silas myself. I've watched other people play him online, I've watched my friends play him in person. I've never actually been the pilot for a Silas, though he's one of those characters I haven't gotten around to, and it's mostly because my table sees a lot of Silas, so I never end up being the one to play him again so soon after. By the time people want to see Silas again, someone else really wants to play Silas, so it just keeps slipping through my fingers. In my own Discord, I've just called dibs on Silas for our next run, whatever it is, as main fighter, because I really want to get a better grasp on Silas, because I think that since he is a skill-based character, skill-based characters look worse from the outside. When you pilot them, when you control them, when you have the hand and the information, you feel much more comfortable than your team does looking at you from the outside with your next to no assets, and it, by all accounts, looks like you're living on a prayer, even when you aren't. Getting into his stat line, Silas Marsh has a 2 in head and a 4 in foot. All the time we say that 3-3 or 4-2 is a good mythos split, totally workable, and all the time we say that in Survivor of all classes, it goes from workable and good to being pretty excellent. I will note that with a 2 base in head and a 5 base in horror soak, you really need to have a solution for horror, but that's not a thing that Silas is going to struggle to accomplish. He's a survivor, but it is a deck building concern you have to manage. Proactively has a 2 in book and a 4 in fist. This 2 in book actually is enough to let Silas play a decent flex game. A lot of the time when I see a proactive split of 2 and 4, I'll call the 2 wasted. And to some degree that's true, and there will always be decks where it is explicitly true, but in Survivor of all classes, where Mariner's Compass is able to pump the number higher, and Silas, who is a skill-based character, you're able to build a flex Dark Horse Silas that's able to get a decent number of clues with Mariner's Compass, and even though your numbers are not the best, they are good enough to do the job, and I have seen flex Silas make use of this book a lot. That said, I'm not personally a fan of it. I still think flex Silas is weaker than fighter Silas, but that said, it's not a bad stat line at all. 4 in fist is workable, you'd obviously like to be more. 2 and 4 in mythos is completely fine in Survivor. It's not a particularly impressive stat line, but by no means is it a bad one. 9-5 split in health is one of the few stat lines that in a post in the thick of it world is not giving you a 6 in your lowest soak, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, it's also a character where there's like almost no downside to in the thick of it, because with 9 and 1 soak, there's just not a reason not to get in the thick of it. So even though 7-5 is worse than 6-6 in terms of post in the thick of it values, it's still not like much worse than just having 6-6 soak. Silas's ability is incredible. Reaction: after you reveal a chaos token during a skill test you are performing, return a skill you committed to this test to your hand, limit once per round. At its most basic use, when you swing up 2 at a ghoul, you're able to commit overpower, and then if you hit, you put overpower back in your hand. And if you miss, because it was an auto fail, you put overpower back in your hand. But if you hit because of the overpower, you just leave it committed. It turns every skill into lucky once per round. That's the most basic implementation of what this can do. There's also much more broken stuff. Unfortunately, Daring got clarified and doesn't work with Silas's ability the way Unrelenting does, but there are some skills, Unrelenting chief among them, where they create an immediate or persistent effect after you commit the skill, and that gives you insane value. When you return those to your hand, committing Unrelenting, just doing that is what draws the cards, so whether it stays in the skill test or not doesn't actually matter. Silas also has one of the best stars in the game, bar none. Star effect +0, but as always, I don't care what the plus number is. Although with a 2 in head, it can matter in mythos phase, but it will still get there because you may commit a skill from your discard pile to this test. So if you have anything committing for heads or question marks, you can find something to pass a mythos test even on this star with a +0 on head. But additionally, after this test ends, return the skill to your hand instead of discarding it. So at its best, this will pull a vicious blow or a strong-armed or a stunning blow on attack against the threatening monster that it wasn't going to kill, or it'll pull a quick thinking as well. There are plenty of different fight skills this can pull where recurring them during a fight against something threatening is really valuable. You can also just pull something that's generically good and keeps you safe to the mythos phase. You can just pull quick thinking for an extra action. There's basically not a discard pile Silas can have where this doesn't do something crazy, and it's incredibly good. Getting into his deck building rules, he has deck size 30, survivor 0-5, neutral 0-5, and innate 0-2. So he gets a pile of additional skill cards outside of his class. Coming over to his signatures, Sea Change Harpoon is the thing that I always want to build around when I look at Silas, and where I'm always heartbroken if our Silas doesn't build around it. It is a 3-cost fist asset item. It is action fight. You get +1 fist for this attack. If you committed 1 or more skills to this test, this attack deals +1 damage. So if you're committing skills, which you're Silas you are, this is +1 for 2, which is conditionless machete. It does have a condition, but that condition should pretty much always be met. When this skill test ends, you may return Sea Change Harpoon to your hand to return all of your committed skills to your hand instead of discarding them. A big part of the reason why I've seen less of Sea Change Harpoon is because a Dark Horse Silas cannot afford to replay a Sea Change Harpoon, so that Mariner's Compass thing I was talking on earlier tends to be mutually exclusive with this. But the ability to build a deck where you commit 5 very impactful fight skills to an attack, and then return all of them to your hand with the Sea Change Harpoon, that is incredibly powerful and very clearly worth the 3-cost action to replay. The Harpoon is just a very, very cool build around and very, very powerful, and it doesn't take a lot for it to be very good. It might not be the Disneyland bullshit you want every time. It's not always gonna be 1 copy of Strong Arm, 2 copies of Vicious Blow, and a Stunning Blow getting returned to your hand, but every time you use this, it will probably be guaranteeing a kill on a 3 health enemy or more in 1 action. And by use this, I mean the last part where you return it to your hand. You can just kill normal guys with this all day long. The net I find substantially less impressive. If you run the Harpoon, you get the net as well. It's another hand slot asset, action evade, you get +1 foot. If you succeed and committed 1 or more skills in the skill test, you may automatically evade another enemy engaged with you. Personally, I don't see that as being a very impactful thing. And then has the same text where you return the net to get all of the skills back, but just like how often am I engaged with multiple enemies at once, spending an action to put this in play is not very efficient because of how niche it is to actually apply to something. If I'm engaged with 1 enemy, engaging a second enemy to get this to work triggers an opportunity attack and I have 5 Horror Soak. Silas's net all around just underwhelms me. I've never seen it be great and I can't really envision the world where it is. Feel free to tell me what I'm missing. Siren Call is the weakness paired with these 2 assets. It goes in your threat area. As an additional cost, you commit 1 or more cards to a skill test. You must pay 1 resource for each matching skill icon those cards have, which as a red character with generally pretty cheap decks with very low economy, you can't really afford to do. So what this actually does is almost immediately make you spend 2 actions to discard Siren Call. Not the biggest deal in the world, but a meaningful weakness. Not one you get to ignore like some weaknesses, and not one that does way, way too much and cripples you like some others. Personally, Sea Change Harpoon Fighter Silas is the thing that I'm tempted by, the thing I always want to play. I think it has a much stronger top end and is comparably good at its floor to a Dark Horse Flex Silas. And the main reason I would ever not play with these assets is because, well, I'm doing Dark Horse Flex stuff and I can't afford to be replaying the Harpoon. In that case, he does have alternate stuff he can use. Nautical Prowess commits for a head, a book, and a question mark. And if a Chaos token with a negative modifier is revealed during this test, either draw 1 card or Nautical Prowess gains 2 question marks. So either this will be the reason you pass or you'll draw a card. Both of them are great effects. And it comes with Dreams of the Deep. It is 2 negative question marks. If this skill test fails, return this skill to your hand. And if it's in your hand at the end of your turn, reveal it and take 2 damage. This can be pretty scary. Obviously 2 damage is not the thing Silas is super afraid of, so it's not the most worrisome thing. But because you're going to more or less have to trip or punch a guy with a bunch of other skills contributed to the test to make sure you pass, you can just draw this at times where there aren't enemies on the board and you cannot push your book to a high enough number to break this. It can be very, very scary in nightmare circumstances. In most circumstances, you probably break this within 2 actions and it doesn't do much to you, if anything. But it is not nothing. And because you're adding 2 cards to your deck to get a Nautical Prowess, one of which is a fairly cumbersome weakness, I tend to think it's not worth running Nautical Prowess in addition to Sea Change Harpoon. And if I'm gonna pick one or the other, I mean, again, as I've said repeatedly, Sea Change Harpoon is the cool thing that Silas does that's really, really appealing to me. I won't be showing off a Dark Horse Flex Silas today. Every time I've seen that sort of deck, it has done well. We've completed the campaign. They've never been dead weight. It's definitely a solid deck, but at the same time, every time I've ever seen it, I've just seen it testing Mariner's Compass up to over and over and over again at the mercy of the bag, and it's not the sort of deck that strikes me as reliable enough to be the best thing that a Silas can do. Coming over to the sort of main fighter Sea Change Harpoon Silas that I would like to play, you'll be unsurprised to see 2 copies of Backpack to help search it out. And as for other items that I can run with that backpack, Sparrow Mask strikes me as one of the things that I rather desperately want. Sparrow Mask is enough to get your foot to 6 and basically beat any foot treachery. It's gonna recharge relatively easily. Getting your head to 4 is not enough to beat the bag, but if anyone else gives you something, you'll likely be safe to omit those tests. Additionally, just due to fail by effects with stuff like Rotting Remains, this will be very valuable for Mythos Negation there. You also just need something cheap and garbagey to throw away when you get Crypt Shield. Sparrow Mask feels worth running in any Survivor with a backpack. I went back and forth repeatedly on whether or not I'd rather run Pete Sylvester because he's generally much better than a Cherished Keepsake, or Cherished Keepsake because the backpack can find it. Ultimately, I went with Pete. I view that +1 foot, +1 head as being fairly impactful with the Mythos phase. The additional Horror Soak, not really a factor for me. I'm mostly spending the 3 resources for the stats, not so much the Horror Soak that it has over Cherished Keepsake. But honestly, I'm neither here nor there with it. I think it's a fairly minor decision in the overall power level of the deck, and I could be convinced that this is wrong, especially if there were more powerful events that I were more interested in running in Silas. And the rest of this item package is just Fire Extinguisher and Meat Cleaver as backup weapons for when I don't have Sea Change Harpoon, or just weapons to use in my other hand if I don't want to commit a skill. As for the rest of the deck, I'm running out of Crossroads. It's the best draw in Survivor. I will always be running out of Crossroads. I guess I'll start using this view for decks. I don't like showing the title like this because it has the little blue bar right at the top that looks wrong too, but what can I do? Anyway, I will always want to run Lucky in pretty much any Survivor. It's probably at its least good in Silas due to the way you're using his ability as pseudo Lucky so often, but I still just really value Lucky and don't see something competing with it that would drive it out of the deck. And the rest of this deck is 16 fight-centric skills. We have Savant for helping with the Mythos phase, but the rest of this really is for fighting. Well, not Unrelenting. Unrelenting is for drawing your entire deck because it's 2 draw every turn of the game if that's how you want to use your ability. The rest of this, however, is all fighting. Overpower is draw and consistency for fighting. Quick Thinking is going to give you an additional action provided you can pass by enough. Strong Arm will negate your chance to auto-fail in addition to being Vicious Blow. Speaking of a Vicious Blow, we have Long Shot, the red Vicious Blow that comes with no icons. We got Brute Force, which is a way to deal 3 damage in 1 hit with no additional skills, although its numbers aren't the best because you're really base 5 if you commit this in isolation, but that will usually not be the case. You can find something else, often overpowered, to commit alongside of it. Stunning Blow, to me, is a card I've never been particularly impressed by. I've heard so many people in the community talk highly of it. When I've seen other people at my table running it, I've never seen them get good results on it. I know I've run it in probably Yorick and somebody, and I've just found no use for it. Stunning Blow is a card, however, where I look at this, I'm like, yeah, it's gotta be useful, right? Surely Silas can get value out of this. But it's a card where I'd really be running it because I've just heard so many people talk about it well, and I've never seen it myself that I feel like I must be missing something. And that's really the whole deck. And one of the things that happens when I look at a Silas deck is I very, very often look at it and think, huh, is that it? Because it feels so weird for my deck to really just be at a crossroads, Lucky, a weapon, a Sparrow Mask, Pete Sylvester, and 16 skills. Part of the reason that I'm thinking I'm overly down on Silas is because even other characters that really care about skills do not care about skills as much as Silas. And Silas, he runs skills the way Nacho runs fighting events, and it makes the deck feel very, very warped. Coming down to a starter deck, it is largely the same thing. I was considering Fire Axe, but I really don't want to have to priority upgrade a Fire Extinguisher in this deck. So in the name of replaying Sea Change Harpoon, I'm going 18 Derringers over the Fire Axe. Cherished Keepsake is in the starter deck just because I'm going to be worse at drawing through my deck in general, making it harder to find Pete, who will also be worse at Soaking Horror, and will not be giving me the head that can mitigate some incoming horror. As for the rest of the deck, I'm using my In the Thick of It for Unrelenting and a Crossroads. Ignore this incorrect note on the old deck. I'm running Inquiring Mind as a bad level 0 Savant, basically. It'll commit for the same question marks on a head test. Well, on any test, actually. But it requires you to be at a location with a clue, which I find that as the fighter, you very frequently are, especially during the Mythos phase. And in lieu of some of the higher level stuff that just can't quite be in the deck yet, I have a Take Heart because it's just a source of draw. I'm missing the At a Crossroads, I'm missing, that's really it for draw I'm missing. But Take Heart's just a thing you can somewhat reliably trigger on Silas with your 2 head and 2 book. And I have a Daring, again, just something to put in the deck to draw towards the stuff I really want. Because really, I want to run a ton of draw to find Sea Change Harpoon, and then have this massive pile of fight-based skills. The core deck's only 24 experience, and when you look at the stuff that you really care about, it's not really Fire Extinguishers or Pete's. Those can wait. That's 10 experience, that's 14 experience, 3 from In the Thick of It, that's 11. And Dream Eaters, that's literally scenario 1, right? You get your At a Crossroads, you get your 2 copies of Brute Force, your 2 copies of Savant, your 2 copies of Strong Armed, and you upgrade both your backpacks to better find the Harpoon. And yeah, you can get Fire Extinguisher and Pete later, they're not nearly as important. So a big strength of Silas is that he does not have a lot of critical startup experience. Thanks to In the Thick of It letting you start with Unrelenting, you really don't feel like you have a particularly weak level 0 deck. Your first upgrade's really impactful, but that's true for almost every character in the game. It's not critical to your functionality, it just makes you a lot better, and in particular a lot better at finding the Harpoon, but very few scenario 1s are gonna you don't need the Harpoon in scenario 1, that's just how it tends to go. Additionally, in scenario 1, you don't even have that much stuff to recur with the Harpoon in the first place. So I find that one of the strengths of Silas that it's easy for me to forget about is that he's an absolute tank in scenarios 2 and 3 compared to a lot of other characters. Like, he comes online very, very quickly, and he has very little that he actually needs. My big issue with Silas largely comes down to having seen him be in bad situations so often. As an example, in a recent scenario 1, I saw a Silas at base 4 punch an enemy and commit long shot. They then said, it's fine, I'm only up 1 because the enemy was base 3, but if I get -2 or -3, I'll just use lucky and pass. And what happened is they hit the opponent, killed them, didn't need to use lucky, which is a big thing about the strength of lucky, is it lets you do stuff like this. And then if he missed by more than that, he would just return long shot to his hand. But my thought when I see plays like that, and when I see Silas in general, is that same thought I had when I first saw Nacho of like, oh god, is he gonna run out of cards? I've just seen a lot of Silases miss their draw and look really flimsy in the first couple of turns, and when they're doing that, when they're a 4/5 survivor struggling to put something together, they are one of the least confidence-inspiring fighters I've ever seen. However, we don't judge them based on the worst case scenario alone, we judge them on average. Coming over to the tier list, you're gonna notice this looks very different. Some characters have moved a couple of spots. Characters I haven't yet talked about have likely moved more than ones I have. And I'll talk more about the tier list in a little bit. For now, let's focus on Silas. I've currently got Silas on the bottom of my B tier. Previously, he was around here with Patrice and Alessandra, although the tiers were arranged differently. And at that point in time, it would have been near the top of C tier, with D and C being my bottom tiers. Silas has moved up probably about 10 spots since last I covered him, and that's because as I've been looking at Silas and really trying to critically evaluate him based on what I've seen from other people and less how I feel about only the experience I've seen at my table, I've been more kind to him. I don't know that I could ever move him into my second highest tier. I do think that upon playing him, he might move up a lot. I don't know that I'd ever say he's better than Cho, and I don't think I can convince myself that Cho's A tier either. I think it's highly likely that Silas will move up after I play him, but probably won't break out of my B tier. I think he's just good enough on so little experience that it puts him into a similar boat as Mandy, where I trust him to be very good in the opening scenarios. And sort of for different reasons than Mandy, he's not going to scale up with experience as well as other characters. With Mandy, it's that your deck is 50 cards, so that your rate of getting those experience cards is lower. With Silas, it's that after about 25 experience, you really don't need any more. So there's nothing to scale with because your deck being changed doesn't really improve it very much. I think that generally Silas is a good enough, reliable enough fighter with enough Mythos resilience just due to the way his stat line functions and access to cards like Pete and Cherished Keepsake. Like, he's not super afraid of the Mythos. I'm not gonna go so far as to say that he's particularly resilient. I haven't seen a Sparrow Mask Silas yet, so maybe he's more resilient than I'm giving him credit for. But he's reliable, he's relatively safe, he's able to do some very impressive things in crisis situations. Similarly to Finn, where I think Finn's ability to manage crises is a big part of why I like Finn so much. A big part of why Silas gets to be in B tier is the same thing, where he can fix some truly crazy problems with explosive turns using the harpoon. I think I would rate the Dark Horse Flex Silases I've seen somewhere around like Kohaku and Preston. I think that's a good thing to compare them to, maybe a little bit worse than Preston. But I think Harpoon Silas is something I've only ever seen at my table with horrible variants, and it's better than I've given it credit for, and it deserves to make it into B tier. One thing I was realizing a while ago is I looked at where Nat Cho is and where Silas is, like, shit, how many fighters are actually in my A tier? And it's really only 2. It's Lily and Zoe. As for Flexes, there's Dexter, and any Mystic, I guess, can be built as a Flexes. Parallel Agnes was definitely a Flex deck, though. And it's mostly Cloovers and Crazy Jank. And I'm wondering if, like, maybe I just have, like, a lot of lingering anti-fighter bias, and that's why Nat Cho's not making it into my A tier. Because I've got Nat Cho as a fighter in Dream Eaters right now. I'm watching him destroy the game, and I'm looking at him being, like, beneath Ursula, Monterey, and Diana, and not really being convinced by this. Not really being convinced by Beneath the Men either. And moving him up to here, as we're getting off of Silas, I'm gonna start talking about some of this stuff in the tier list that I'm realizing as I switch over to these tiers. And even if I don't end up keeping the bottom tier for the sake of easy comparison to other tier lists, one thing I do like about changing the tier list is anytime I change the tiers, I force myself to reevaluate characters and be a lot harsher to the people along the borderlines. Not necessarily harsher, scrutinize them more thoroughly. That's a better description. So for instance, Luke Robinson, I'm very concerned I'm being too nice to. I love Luke. I've just watched someone else put him in their S tier, and I'm like, hell yeah, I love that other people love Luke. But at the same time, like, he is just a 4-head Mystic doing the normal 4-head Mystic proactive stuff. He is better at drawing and insanely better at movement, and his ability has some really fucking cool tricks. but I really do not know that he's good enough to keep pace with the absolute insanity that is an S tier. If he's an S tier, he's on the low end of it, he's in the right spot. The same exact thing is true on Parallel Pete, where I wonder if I'm being too harsh to him. His deck's just like a completely functional, good difficulty 0 deck, where he's doing enough as a flex as a clover to like more than carry a flex's clue weight. He's not having any problems there, he's good enough. He's got team support in a variety of ways where he's soaking for his team. And then on top of that, his enemy management is just absolutely insane. The stuff he uses with his ability is pretty solid and fairly good, but the guitar is just absolutely cracked. So the baseline floor for a Parallel Pete is higher than the floor for almost anyone else, because you start with the guitar in play. You cannot get screwed by enemies on turn 2, because Pete just won't let that happen to you, right? And I think that maybe I'm being too harsh on Pete based on how janky he is. I think he's very good. I don't know if I'm being too kind or too harsh to the man though. At some point when I was restructuring the tier list, I looked at Jacqueline and Mateo side by side, and Parallel Mateo does what I say Jacqueline basically does. I say that Jacqueline will basically guarantee you pass 1 test per turn. Having seen Parallel Mateo actually pass 1 test per turn, it is not the same, like at all. I saw Father Mateo clear out 6 Shroud locations with nothing in play that boosted his stats. That's not what Jacqueline does. She's not that reliable. She's very good, but she's not quite that level of ludicrous where, like, you can't just use Jacqueline's ability and assume you'll get a +1 and have it be a good play, right? So Parallel Father Mateo is what I optimistically view Jacqueline as. I think the reality of Jacqueline's power level is that she's probably worse than Luke. Luke's additional draw and crazy mobility probably puts him above Jacqueline in power level. I think I'm too nice to her in general, just because she has an ability that I absolutely love. Coming down to C tier, I've got Joe Diamond at the bottom of my C tier. I don't know that I'm being too kind or too harsh to the man. We've got to play all Joes at some point. My tabletop group jokes about this idea, but I think they don't actually want to do it. So I'm gonna have to do a standalone with multiple flex Joes and then like a fighter Kluber Joe standalone and just play 4 Joes without these people. But I think Joe as bottom of C tier is a good gatekeeper. He's got a lot of problems and a lot of good things going for him. Jumping back up though, I think I might be too nice to Charlie Kane. I don't really know that he's great. He's definitely good. His opening scenario is a bit awkward. I think he's great, but he's on the edge for me, just like Min's on the edge. I really don't know that Min is like, I view different tiers as categorically better or worse. I don't think Min is categorically better than Ursula. I think they're playing the same game. I think somebody like Kate is categorically better than either of them. So I think Min shouldn't be as high as she is. Getting down to the bottom 2 tiers, I feel pretty comfortable with this. I do need to like more closely look at Parallel Roland and Parallel Gem decks. I'll get back to them eventually before I do a full tier list. One thing I'll mention is I think maybe there's a Marie deck that I haven't cracked that at least gets her into D tier, but I don't know. I'll circle back to her like so many others. And Sister Mary dropped a lot between videos. I don't think it's ever been addressed. This is as a result of the deny existence taboo, which I just forgot was a thing before I was talking about her and then later on Diana. I know people in Sister Mary's video must have told me about this, and I was like, oh, that sucks. And it sucks so much I just forgot it was true when I made the Diana video. Just completely threw that information away. But now that it's stuck in my head, I look at Sister Mary as just being more Mythos Resilience than other Guardians, because now she's arguably the worst fighter for enabling Bless, at least within Guardian, right? Because every other Guardian fills the bag with Ancestral Token alone, right? You can just play an Ancestral Token backpack deck and get enough Blesses to enable your whole team. But Sister Mary is the only one with a weakness that's gonna rip them out of the bag and replace them with curses, because you can no longer take full horror and deny it. So that really hurts her a lot. I'd probably have her at like the top of D tier, maybe bottom of C tier, if it weren't for the deny existence taboo. But because she's so much worse at enabling Bless with the change to deny, it really hurts the main reason you run the character in the first place. No one's playing Sister Mary to have more Mythos Resilience on their Runic Axe character. That's not the appeal of Sister Mary, it's to put Blesses in the bag. Having covered what I view as most of the changes to the tier list, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I really don't have anything more to say about Silas Marsh. If you think I've done something wildly out of line with the tier list and not addressed it, feel free to ask me about it. If you have something you know about Silas where you think I'm overlooking it or underestimating how bad it is, either way, I'd love to hear it. But for now, I'm done. I've been Rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then please do hit all the buttons to make the algorithm happy. And a massive thank you to everyone supporting this channel, both its patrons over on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube. I'll see all of you in the next one.